Elementary music teacher friend, you love what you do, but you might feel unappreciated and, in fact, unseen some days. You may even feel like you're on a music teacher island and just want to connect with other music teachers who can relate to both your struggles and wins when it comes to teaching elementary music. I get you and understand completely the feelings you're having. That's why each and every week, the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast will provide you with solo and guest episodes that will help you realize you're not alone in your music teaching journey. Throughout each episode, my goal is for you to be able to walk away with actionable steps and ideas to help you feel like you're ready to take on the new week with whatever challenges may be thrown your way. Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Peresta, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're at home, in your car, in the shower, or wherever else you're listening, grab your cup of coffee or whatever other beverage is nearby and listen in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Culturally relevant teaching. This is something that you have heard about. Maybe you've read about it. Maybe you've listened to podcasts, either mine or other podcasts. There's amazing ones out there. You've probably maybe read some books. You've had professional development opportunities about it, conversations around this. So especially this school year, culturally relevant teaching has been a focal point of, one of the focal points of this school year. And even though you know about it, maybe you're still wanting some tips and strategies to really relate to the students you teach, to really make music education relevant to your students. And so in this episode, Casey Hall came on the podcast to talk about culturally relevant teaching. What is it? How do you do it with your students? How do you form relationships with the students you have? How do you touch on the different cultures of students that come into your classroom? How do you research what music your students like? And how can you shift in order to teach them the way they need to be taught and not like the students who, are down the street from you? So let me tell you a little bit about Casey before we get into this amazing episode. He is a fine arts education program specialist at the Georgia Department of Education. And as a fine arts education program specialist, it's his mission to create the next generation of fine artists and foster a deep appreciation of the arts for students and fine arts patrons in the state of Georgia. In Georgia, he believes this occurs with a world-class fine arts education, fine arts experiences in the arts community, and fine arts extensions of learning after school. He joins the Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts Department team from Fulton County Schools as a fine arts support teacher and the music specialist at Wolf Creek Elementary School in Atlanta, Georgia. On the FAST team, he coached and provides support for elementary music teachers across the district. He was a member of Fulton County's Vanguard team and works with educators across all grade levels and disciplines to support a personalized learning environment in their classrooms, build capacity, and seamlessly integrate technology. He was selected to be a member of the working committee to revise the Georgia Performance Standards for Music in 2017. Most recently, he was awarded the title of 2019-2020 South Learning Community Teacher of the Year for Fulton County Schools. He holds a bachelor's degree in music education from the Schwab School of Music at Columbus State University and a master's degree in music education from Georgia State School of Music. While at GSU, he studied and developed the term culturally driven pedagogy, which is a comprehensive term which uses students' culture to drive instructional practices, as well as developed a songwriting curriculum for the Johnny Mercer Foundation. Mr. Hall has presented at various conferences on topics such as project-based learning, personalized learning, app smashing, cultural pedagogies, culturally driven pedagogy, and behavior and classroom management at international, national, state, and local school district professional development sessions. So as you can see, Mr. Casey Hall is very knowledgeable about this topic. He is very well versed in the music education community, and this conversation is so needed, and I cannot wait for you to listen in today. Welcome to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. I'm so excited to have you back, listeners. And I am joined today by Casey Hall, and we're going to be talking about culturally relevant music education. And I'm going to let Casey tell you a little bit more about himself and his music teaching journey and what he's doing now in the world of music education. So welcome, Casey.
Basically, that role sounds very fancy, but in the grand scheme of things, I just get the opportunity to support music teachers specifically, as I'm a music person, obviously, across the state of Georgia, and support them in however I can at the state level, and really be an advocate for the arts in general at the state level, but also just supporting teachers with what they need. And that, that ranges with the great expanse of all of like the 180 plus school districts that we have. I actually started this position during COVID. When quarantine started, it was my first day of this job. So it has been an interesting transition, to say the least. Prior to getting this position, I was just a normal general music teacher, kindergarten through fifth grade, for about 10 years in my school. And it was awesome. I loved it. And it was, again, like I was saying, it was super hard to leave my kids, especially like at the beginning of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Not really knowing what that looked like, because I did have to leave in, the middle of the school year, essentially. I left in March. So can't believe it's already been like a year since then. That's just crazy to me. And I did that. And then kind of what led me on my trajectory to kind of accepting this position and being okay with leaving, because I really do enjoyed teaching. It was my jam. I loved me just being silly with the kids and stuff like that, and just having fun with them in my music classroom. So it was super hard to say kind of goodbye to that and to move on to this new thing. But I am also really heavily passionate about teacher education, teacher support, and things like that. So when I was still teaching, I was also offered in kind of a side position, I guess you could say, as a fine arts support teacher for my district. Really tried to be like a coach with them, kind of walk through this journey together. And it was kind of nice because I got the opportunity, to kind of the best of both worlds, not to quote Miley Cyrus or anything, but
Everything's a song lyric.
I know, exactly. But I got the best of both worlds of I got to be inside the classroom, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, just jamming out with my kids, teaching music and having fun, but then also to be pulled from the classroom and see the varying different kind of perspectives that there are. And by perspectives, I mean just the very different teaching styles that other teachers would have. So it was really a huge learning moment for me and growing moment for me, because I realized that not everything is, we get so ingrained in what we do and stuff like that. But then to be able to have the opportunity to go out and see other types and styles and strategies. And then I got to kind of collect all of those things in this big arsenal of teaching stuff, and then give them out to other teachers, almost like little mini teacher presents kind of thing. And have the opportunity. So I was like, oh, well, this teacher in this classroom, it's set up differently than yours, but they do this really great strategy and whatever. Have you thought about trying it in yours? And we kind of talk about it, practice it together. And they try it, we come back, kind of circle everything back around to see if it worked. If it didn't, great. We all teach differently. Things work differently. Things look differently in our classrooms. But the fact that, strategies can be kind of cycled around. Maybe it works for even one class. It didn't work for this class, but it works for one class,
Right.
It was a really great chance and opportunity for me to kind of, again, get that best of both worlds kind of thing, where I got to kind of be in my own little bubble in my school as a teacher, but then also to see music education through this broader scope of amazing difference that we have and how they can be used in multiple ways, and just having the opportunity to share and collaborate and support those teachers really set me on my trajectory for this position at the state level. So whereas I, kind of got a little taste of it through that support position when I was a teacher, now I get it on a statewide basis, like I was saying, with this, 180 plus school districts. So you really broadening that scope of being able to support these teachers really, I made the hard decision, took the plunge, and
Yeah.
accepted the position, and have pretty much been working my butt off, for lack of a better word. Again, like I said, it started in COVID. So, COVID has really flipped everything upside down for everyone. And it has been the biggest learning curve of my life currently. I'm still learning, just, almost bridging a year in March. I love doing it. And though it is sometimes a very thankless position, and we don't get a lot of feedback at the state level, there's little moments, of feedback that you do get are like super rewarding and stuff like that. So like I was saying, now I'm doing a lot of virtual professional development that are free for teachers to use if they need to, and they're content specific, which is really great. And it's not just for the fine arts, it's really for any educational content community. But we got the opportunity to kind of pilot that. And so we're kind of figuring it all out as we go. But currently we have 12 different fine arts content areas in specific. So it's not just music, art, dance, theater. It's like high school theater,
cool.
like general music, kindergarten through 8th grade and stuff like that. So that's kind of my big project that I'm working on right now, is trying to develop this sense of community virtually, because a lot of the times, a lot of the cases, we are the only arts person in our buildings.
Yes.
And we don't really have that unless you have like a professional learning community that's at the district level, where you can see other teachers and collaborate with them. Sometimes you're not, and you're literally the only person in your district. So where do you find professional development? Where do you find that, collaboration and community? So that's kind of what we're trying to build. So I'm really excited about that project. We just got started in January with it. So we're kind of slowly trucking along, trying to get like support and, people to buy into this whole idea of this like online community, just so that we can continue collaborating and sharing all these great strategies. But on, this basically, to me, it's like an educational Facebook or something like that.
Yeah.
Instead of having like all those Facebook groups, random Facebook groups that you're a part of, it's like one kind of hub for that.
Yes.
And so it's very content specific.
Love it.
I think it's going to do really cool. Unfortunately, it is only for Georgia music educators. Or not Georgia educators in general, but that's kind of my long, probably my music teaching journey and where I'm at right now. But
love it. You have so much to share. And I'm just so excited about having you on, because being an instructional coach for teachers is so needed, especially with fine arts, because the imposter syndrome teachers are facing is real. The being encouraged when you've been in different classrooms that it's okay to be yourself and to not do things the same as everyone else.
When I was the support teacher, as a teacher, not in my position currently, there were times where, we get, as not just as just teachers, but as humans, I think that we have like the comparison game, or we play it. And especially with things like social media, and there's, like teacher TikTok is like the newest, biggest thing, and like teacher Gram and teacher Twitter and stuff like that. And we all see these things, and we just kind of forget that we're doing great things in our classrooms too. And we just may not be broadcasting it to everybody, but I do feel like the comparison game really, kind of diminishes, self-esteem, self-confidence, joy and stuff like that. And so there were conversations that I would have with teachers that, well, just because you don't have this resource that someone else has, even though you really want it, like, how can you take that idea and make it into something else? And that's totally fine. It kind of like you were saying, like a you do you moment and make it yours, or, a Tim Gunn moment, make it work.
Yes.
And so, there were conversations with teachers that, and it wasn't everybody, but it was nice to be able to provide them with other perspectives and ideas because of that position, where if I was just in a PLC, or if I was just a lone teacher myself, I wouldn't have experienced or even thought about to talk about, or even like thought about to try in my own classroom. So it was really cool to be able to do that. And now at like the state level, it's even like 10 times that, because it's at the state level, not just district or my own personal school, but like that state level, because every district has the ability to do things how they want to do and how they see fit for their students. And I think that's great. But that comparison game does get, even at the state level. Right now, we're trying to be as broad as possible, but also as specific as we can to be able to support multiple teachers in multiple kinds of districts who are all doing it differently. So yeah, to answer your question.
Which is difficult to navigate. You have so many different teachers who every single person has a different teaching situation. And so it's just like, it's like a blanket, like when I'm mentoring teachers too, like okay, so here's this lesson plan, but if you're teaching virtually, adapt it this way. If you're on a cart, you can still do it, but you're probably going to need to adapt it a little bit because while the kids are at their desk. And it's like me having to think through the process of, okay, here's the 767 different teaching situations they may find themselves in, and here's what they could do. Like, it's just so hard right now, but
yeah, it's a tricky and important slope to go down.
Yes. All right. Well, we're going to talk about culturally relevant music education, and I'm so excited to dive into this. It's so important and so needed to have this conversation. And I want to just talk about, first of all, why is it important in general, but then also for our listeners who maybe have heard this conversation going on, but are still maybe like, what exactly does it mean? Or how do I apply this to my teaching situation? What advice do you have around that for them?
So I'll maybe give you a little bit more backstory of like why I even came to being interested in this topic and applying it into my personal situation. So I was teaching at my first school that I taught at, and I will just go out and say it and like I'm embarrassed of it. It's like the truth. I am a white male, and I predominantly, all my students were Black, and I was having, especially like, it was almost like the new kid on the block. Like I was a brand new teacher right out of college, and they didn't know me, I didn't know them. So I was almost quote unquote trying to get like street cred with them, like be like the cool teacher and stuff like that. And it just wasn't working. And honestly, there came this aha moment for me. And there's, struggles that I had in the school that I taught at. My aha moment, just to kind of go back to that, was really, I was teaching a lesson, trying to teach, or introduce the Beam 16th notes using that song, ding dong, digga digga dong, digga digga dong, the cat's gone, which is like this English folk song, I think, that like they have no connection to. And they're like, why are we singing about ding dongs, for lack of a better term? Like, it's like, I mean, it was like a 5th grade lesson too. So it like, all of that.
I can imagine the conversations.
It was Hot Mess Express. But anyways, tried to push through and persevere. And I just saw them all like slumped over. Like they were like, look, half of them were probably asleep, so out of it. And I was just like, gosh, what am I not doing right? Because like everything I was told to do, I was trained to do, was like, this is a great song to teach this rhythm, blah, blah, blah. But I was not making any sort of connections with them. And so I just like, I don't know what made me think about it. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go grab my djembe. I'm not even going to say anything to them. So I went and grabbed my djembe, and I brought it back, and their interest was kind of piqued. Like, wait, what's he doing? That he's never done that before. And I just started playing like some like rap rhythm, like rap beat, whatever. And I was like, they like started like sitting up in their chairs, and I'm like, ooh, okay, so this is fun. So basically, long story short, we made this huge like rap remix of that song. And it was just that one simple thing that I did to make that learning happen. And for them to be able to have some sort of connection to it, it blew my mind, because afterwards they were like begging me to let them perform it for their classroom teacher. And this is like polar opposite to how they normally were. And so it was such like this huge, like transformative moment in my teaching career that I was like, dang, like what is that? Like, is there a term for it? Is there a label for it? And that was honestly about the same time that I started getting my master's degree at Georgia State University. And I started doing a lot of research and came upon this topic of like culturally relevant education. And not even particularly culturally relevant music education. Yeah. I found that because of finding, culturally relevant
Right.
teaching. But yeah, that's how that's kind of my backstory about culturally relevant teaching. Through my kind of research through my master's degree, and what I was trying to just kind of find out, like, what is there a term for this? Like, what did I just do that made that effective?
Yeah.
Really. And like, how do I continue that to happen? Because it was great and it was fun. And I was just having a blast along with my kids. And it was like this just really magical moment, teaching and learning in my classroom. And so I ended up stumbling upon culturally relevant pedagogy and started my research there. And basically, if you have heard of this, or you've heard conversations around it, like you were saying, basically a very generalized definition, I would say, is that it uses like multiple aspects of students' culture to enhance really like just their overall learning experience. And this is not just something that can be applied to just music. This is like culturally relevant teaching, period.
Yeah.
For any content area. So just really, when it really comes down to it, it's just really about using, I guess, in my perspective and my understanding of it, it uses just who your students are as humans and like enhancing their learning experiences by incorporating things that they like, parts of their culture that may not be a part of your culture. Like I was saying before, like I was just like white male and all my students were Black. I had not one white student, not one, Latino or Hispanic student, not one Asian student. Like they were all Black in my instance. So there was a big cultural divide that I was finding. And it just kind of struck me in that moment that adding in this rap beat may make them a little bit more engaged in my situation. And so that was kind of that spark that, again, started this whole process of me researching this. And so there's a bunch of what I call cultural pedagogies out there, things like multicultural education. There's another term for culturally relevant pedagogy, which is culturally responsive pedagogy. And to me, they're like way similar. So I never really understood why they were separate. I did like this whole comparing and contrast analysis through my master's degree, but really ultimately they're just, using the cultural knowledge of the students that you're teaching, their prior experiences, and just making their learning styles relevant and effective for them, no matter who they are.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what culturally, relevant pedagogy is, or, teaching, or however you want to say it, whatever term you want to use. And that was through my research. Part of what I was talking about was like, why do we have all of these labels? Basically, we have culturally responsive, culturally relevant, multicultural. There's other ones like critical theory, critical pedagogy, pluralistic education and stuff like that. Things that I had like no idea about, honestly. And through my research, I was like, why do we have all these like, and obviously like there's varying like levels of culture too. Like, you have, I mean, I could talk for hours about this, but
no, you go.
if you haven't already told. But culture can be defined, like there's no true definition of culture, in my opinion, which kind of adds to like its beauty. So like you can think about culture as like the 21st century culture, nothing about race or ethnicity or anything like that. Or you could talk about culture in terms of, religion or family values, different experiences that they've had, and just all those interests, likes, dislikes, all these like things wrap around to this idea of culture. So, whoever your students are, whatever they're interested in, you're using that to drive your instruction. You're not changing the content. You're not changing the standards. You're just enhancing all those things with their culture. So in my case, I knew a lot of my kids listened to a lot of rappers and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, like, and I guess that was that like moment. I don't know why I decided to do it, but I did it. Probably because I was just like fed up with like not being an effective teacher. And I was like, oh, I'm so tired of this. Something has to change. Just kind of tried something and it just happened to be like super successful, and it just kind of sparked this whole thing. But it was just that one thing that I tried to like make them more engaged in the lesson and the learning, and it was highly effective for me.
Yeah.
Now, obviously it looked different for each teacher in each class, in each school, and like wherever you are. So I think that's kind of like the beauty of it, is that yes, these teaching strategies that you know, are a part of this can be applicable to a lot of different situations, but you have to know who your students are, which ultimately, you know, through all of this, I developed these relationships and stuff with my students, and would add different things into my classroom, whether that was decor or what kind of music we listen to, you know, things like that, that really just kind of amped up the learning that we would have in my classroom. So that's, I mean, there's a lot that goes with it. I really urge people, if they would like to talk more about it, you can always like contact me about it, or you can do some research on your own. There's a ton of stuff out there, and there's even stuff now for specifically in the music classroom and culturally relevant music education and stuff like that. But really, you know, when you get down deep to it, I have some like basic strategies under this like term of like culturally driven pedagogy that I kind of helped or developed myself through my research. But it's just like building, you know, empathetic cultural attitudes that reflect the classroom climate. So really, you know, having a sense of empathy. A lot of the times I would try things with my students and they would say, "Oh, that's weird." And I was like, "Okay, well, why is it weird? Is it weird because it's different?" And just having like those miniature conversations. Okay, well, if it's different, does that make it weird, or is it different? And that's just, it's different. And we're just like going to try this thing. We're going to do this thing, you know, those kind of like empathetic attitudes in the classroom. And then honestly, like engaging with students in, you know, worthwhile and intentional discussions about culture. I had a lot of the times where kids would like, in my case, in my perspective, I would say I was white, and they would like, "Oh, that's racist," and stuff like that. And actually like diving into those, I mean, it was like second grade, you know, like how do you have a conversation about racism in second grade? But like leaning into that instead of saying, "Oh no, we're not going to talk about that," you know, in our class. No, oh no, you know, like those kind of like conversations I would lean into and say, okay, it was like, well, I personally identify as a white person. So if you would call me white, I am not offended by that. And we had, you know, conversations about what racism is and stuff like that. And when, you know, back when I was teaching and when like these kind of conversations were happening, it's like when Ferguson were happening, and we had conversations about that and allowing for opportunity. Did I get to all of my lesson that day? No. And I think like those moments really, one, built rapport with me and my students, but two, just developed this like safe zone of in my classroom of like, oh, he actually cares about us, and he actually is like trying to learn and stuff like that, because I was. And so, you know, some more like strategies is, like I was saying before, kind of just challenging what is considered normal. And so when things are outside of that normal sphere, what that looks like, creating, you know, personal relationships with your students as much as possible. I know in my case, I was a general music teacher, so I saw every single one of my students, and that's like 800 plus kids. So a lot of times it was hard, and it developed over years and years, you know, as I saw students, you know, consecutively from year to year. But, you know, really trying to be intentional about that is important. And, you know, adding in musical elements that are relevant to the cultures that are found within your classroom. So in my case, again, things like, you know, I keep saying it, but like adding in rap rhythms or doing remixes of classical music, they really love that kind of stuff. But that whoever your students are, that might not work at all. You know what I'm saying? Or you might have multiple cultures represented in your classroom. So how do you like juggle all of that? So it really depends on who you are teaching, or who is in front of you, and then pulling from that in order to enhance that learning. So like I was saying, I wasn't not teaching the standards. I wasn't not teaching the beamed 16th notes. I just added this little thing in to make it more meaningful and engaging. And then a lot of times, again, kind of those conversations of like, oh, weird or normal. And, you know, we're just taking the time to like talk about like what's familiar and what's unfamiliar, or talking about with your students what they do outside of the school. Like I was blown away. Like some of my kids were like, oh yeah, I take piano. And I'm like, you don't act like you take piano in my classroom.
Yes.
You know, like things like that, you know,
Yeah.
like talking about like maybe, and you know, I had, I'll never forget, I had this like little kindergartner come like first day of school and started singing with the heaviest vibrato I have ever heard in a kindergartner. And I was like, do you go to church with your grandmama or something? And she said, yes, I do every Sunday. And I was like, well, okay, she's emulating the sounds she's hearing. And I was like, at church, you know, so it was like, it's just like things like that, you know, understanding who your students are outside of your classroom and like realizing that those musical experiences or just like learning experiences that they're having also can apply in the classroom as well, you know, to keep segueing through some of these strategies and stuff like that. But to, you know, identify universal like cultural and musical themes when we would do things of another culture and stuff like that. You know, having discussions and stuff like, okay, well, what does the Japanese New Year look like compared to our New Year celebrations and stuff like that when we were talking about those kind of things? A lot of the times I would let the students do research, like, hey, and you know, I'm not assigning homework to them, but I am saying things like, hey, next week we're going to be learning about, we're going to be singing I don't know, you know, a song from Mexico. Go research things about Mexico and let's come back and talk about it next week. I would do that all the time, especially if it was something different than what they were used to. And then just making cross cultural connections and then just really knowing your students. Like, I feel like that is such a big part of this whole like idea of being culturally relevant, because if you don't know who they are, you don't know what's relevant to them. You don't know what to incorporate into your classroom to start that kind of engagement journey with them. So yeah, there's a lot of literature out there on the subject. And from my personal experience, like I was saying, it completely transformed my teaching path and career. I probably would have quit teaching, honestly, if I had to continue in that situation. And I will say that a big thing that you have to realize is you have to be willing to make that change. I feel through my experiences as a support teacher and just talking amongst teacher friends, whether it is on things like Facebook or whatever, it's like if there's not that first willingness to change or to at least to attempt to make some sort of change, then like what is it all for? Like, you know, and so that has to be like your driving factor. It's like, and I think that was my driving factor for making a change. It's like, I'm so sick of them coming to my classroom and not being engaging. And I realized that it wasn't them. They're just kids. Like they're just fifth graders, you know, 10, 11, 12 years old. Like it's not them. It's all has to do with me. And so to me, it was a super time of reflection for me throughout this whole process. And if there isn't that willingness to be like, okay, something's not right, I need to reflect on it. What is it? And then move forward from there. Like that, to me, like that's the more important part to starting this work, is having that reflection and realization of, oh man, something's not right. And then figuring out what that is, because it might not be in your case, culturally driven or culturally relevant teaching. It might be something else. And I might be talking about this and you might be like, okay, sitting here like, okay, Casey, but I'm a white person teaching white students. Okay, that's great. You might have a lot of similar cultural connections that you can make, but what other cultures within that are you not incorporating? So things like, and that's kind of talking about the differing levels, that even if you are teaching primarily white kids, like, are you incorporating technology in your classroom? Because everyone right now, like, we're a technological society. And so if you're not, to me, in my personal opinion, if you're not using technology in your classroom, you're not being relevant. You know, there's like this whole conversation of like, oh, you know, classical music versus in the classroom uses like pop music in the classroom, and like, we should be teaching only Western and stuff like that. You know, all these like different conversation of what is considered right or normal. Like I was kind of saying, you know, just kind of challenging that and being willing to make that change. You may personally not, like for my instance, I don't personally listened to the rappers that some of them were saying. I had to go
Mhm.
and Google. I
Mhm.
Googled all the time. Some of these
Yes.
rappers like, if like Future and DaBaby and all these, like, I learned so many names. I will tell you, so many rappers' names, and I like dug into it and actually
Yeah.
went and listened to some music and stuff like that, of their music that they were listening to. I mean, was it school appropriate all the time? No, and I fully realize that. But again,
Mhm.
that's an at-home musical experience they're
Mhm.
happening. So it's just all these different pieces and aspects of it. In my final, like, I guess you could say thesis or paper or whatever, actually talk about culture being like a diamond, and like every time you turn the diamond, there's like a
Mhm.
facet, and it's
Ooh,
just
that's
as
good.
pretty. It's just as pretty when you
Mm.
turn it one way as you turn it another, but it's still culture. And so
Mhm.
kind of looking at it like that, it's still a diamond, and it's not going to like go away magically.
Mhm.
Like it's
Mhm.
always going to be there, and every time you turn it, and that one facet of that diamond may need to be buffed out a little bit so that
Mhm.
you can see it more clearly. But that's kind of a little not allegory, a metaphor that I kind of
Yeah.
did for that. And then another thing, I did make another kind of connection that, I guess to make it more concrete, instead of this like abstract philosophical like idea, like say like you are a color.
Mhm.
And I think honestly, I was reading a children's book called One at the time, and it was talking about colors, and I think that's why I thought
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
it. But like, say you're a color, doesn't matter what color. So I'm gonna say I'm blue because that's my favorite color, and I am standing in front of students, and my students are red. I am never going to fully understand what it means to be red because I am blue.
Mhm.
So in order to try to begin to understand, I have to like be comfortable in myself to like get like a little purple. You know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
that like little purple mixing of colors happens through the engaging in conversation, knowing who your students are, incorporating things into your classroom that you normally wouldn't incorporate that have to do with the color red, even though you're the color blue. And it can be like this beautiful like mixing of colors or mixing of cultures that just kind of naturally ends up happening because you're, again, that first willingness to dive a little into the red to make a little bit of purple, and then it's like this gorgeous like royal purple color that ends up
Mhm.
happening. And it doesn't happen overnight, and it can happen as slow or as fast as you want, but again, you just have to be willing to allow it to happen and to
Yeah.
happen naturally. I have talked about this in professional
Mhm.
development. I have
Mhm.
talked about this topic. To me, it's just so, it can be transformative no matter who you are, no matter
Yeah.
who is in front of you, as long as that, again, that willingness to change is there for you, the
Yeah.
teacher. So
You made, I mean, so many points that someone listening right now is going to just be like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way. Oh my gosh, that is true. I never thought about cultures can be a lot of different parts of culture, and like you said, we learn about it in like one way. And when you were talking about even the different types of culture being, technology, or you're not technology, or this or that. And when you said technology, if you're not accepting technology is a part of education, I'm earning my master's in educational technology right now. And I'm telling you, it is the way, like it or not, the way education is going, the way the future generation is going. It's just going
well,
to be part
especially
of our
now during
world.
COVID.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I've heard a lot of teachers tell me, but I don't feel like a teacher right now because I feel like I'm just sitting home, the virtual teachers, I'm just sitting home tech for my kids to do. And I'm like, but who's creating those opportunities? Who's creating the videos? Who's sending them the sites? Who's researching the sites to send them? Who's making sure that it's relevant for what you're teaching? And they're like, oh, I mean, I didn't think about that, And so it's, I mean, so many conversations, but your story I can relate to a lot. Same white teacher in an all black school. And this school hadn't had music for 7 years. And when I said I walked in and I had nothing, I finally did find an old set of textbooks hidden way back in one of the cabinets. Spotlight on Music. I don't know if you remember those books from like way back in the day.
Classic.
Yes. And you know what though? I found them and I said, I'm going to make stuff from these books work. So I remember spreading them out on my living room floor. Like when you have nothing to teach from, you just got to get scrappy. And so I literally just went through and all I learned in college. I feel like colleges do better now, but I graduated in 2004 and there was no conversations about, but if you're in this type of school or working with these students or at a high risk school, then at-risk school, then you need to adapt. And maybe these folk songs we're teaching you to do may not work with them. And they're going to give you a look when you try to do Alabama Gal, like, who is she? And why are we, what's a gal? And it's like, yeah. I knew the dance was fun, but they're looking at me like, I'm not holding their hand. I'm not hopping down the circle. I'm not going to, and I'm like, you feel kind of crushed at first, but like I kind of had a perspective change where it was like, it's not about me. It wasn't about like my feelings being hurt. It wasn't about me being like, oh, they don't like what I planned. But like I finally had to just come to the realization, like, this may not work here. All this stuff I thought I was going to be doing, it may not work. And I don't have resources right now to pull from, but what am I going to do? I went through the Spotlight on Music. I found one, Crisscross was in one of the books. I had an old CD and I remember playing that song. They didn't know who they were, still taught the standards, but I had to change it up a bit. And that's hard. It's hard to do when nobody's told you to do that. When I had no instructors saying, I remember even emailing one of my music ed professors and he's like, well, you left with, we told you what to do. And I'm like, you're not listening. Like, it's not working. And so, right. Just like you said, just not staying stuck, being willing to grow, being willing to learn from your students, because like you said, you heard that from your kids. It was like, this is weird, or I don't like this. And sometimes they're saying that because maybe it is weird to them because it's something that they can't relate to, but maybe it's just something weird because it's new to them. They've never tried that. Yeah. Like, what's a body percussion? What do you mean? What do you want us to do? But I love too how you said you left time in your lesson plans to have conversations, because it's so important. And I think it's so important that teachers realize it's okay to not plan from the millisecond that kids come in to when they leave, and to leave open space, because I think leaving space for conversations to naturally happen is so important. Kids will ask questions. They will have a comment about something they learned, talk about the likes and dislikes, and play their favorite music, and reward them at the end of class with like, hey, you just surprise them and play an instrumental track of like one of their favorite rap artists. Because like you said, a lot of them aren't clean, but then all of a sudden they're going to be like, what? And you're like, you earned it today. You did a great job. So I would sit in my car, turn on the rap station on the radio, be like, okay, how can I turn this into an elementary music lesson? And it just took a lot of research and a lot of learning and a lot of adapting what I thought I would be doing. And so thank you for touching on all that. It was so good, good, and so needed to hear, because I know I can really relate to your story. I do want to ask you, you touched on the fact that, you may be teaching in a school where you teach a lot of different cultures of students, like a lot of different backgrounds. So of course the kids can learn from each other, but how do you make sure you are teaching to the different cultures that come in your classroom without feeling like you're leaving a child out, or feeling like everybody feels accepted? And how do teachers, or how do you advise teachers to go around planning that when they're, planning out their school year?
Yeah. And I think that based on what I've said before, teachers might be thinking, oh, I have to do this every day, all the time. Mm-hmm. And that I don't think that's the case. To be honest, it's hard for me to actually fully answer that to an effective answer, because that wasn't my personal experience. Okay. What I would imagine would happen is that if I had, because there were times where I taught in a very transient area. So students left and can't come and go, like in Munchkin Land.
That's hard in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's another challenge that I had to deal with. But there were times when I would have a student from Puerto Rico, and we were doing a holiday song from Puerto Rico, and we were talking about like pasteles and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, I know about this. And it was like, and I was like, oh, okay, well, let's talk about it. Oh my gosh, hi, kind of thing. Aww. I was so excited. And so they would talk about like what we had this conversation in the middle of class about, so tell me about so like, you're the one that celebrates, like, you tell us about it. And telling about us how like, just about the traditions of the holiday that they were in or something. And so that was like a moment, granted an unplanned moment, but
right.
So
but those are sometimes the best, don't you think?
Totally. So I guess in order to answer your question, I would imagine that, just take a broad look or a wide look at your students through a wide lens and try to pull from more broad cultures so that you're reaching because maybe you have a ton of different cultures in your classroom. So maybe you need to think about culture in terms of like the technology side of it. Like, how can I still be relevant to them across multiple cultures, multiple varying different cultures? And then every now and again, pull from students' cultures who are in your school or in your classroom. Does that make sense? So it's not an everyday thing, but you're still incorporating like things that they are interested in. Like, that is a culture, can be a culture, like
gotcha.
In and of itself. Like those fidget spinners, like that's a whole like fidget spinner culture. Like, I know it was a craze and it was a fad and stuff like that, but I mean, I honestly didn't mind them in my classroom because it's like, like, unless they didn't make noise or sound, they were trying to focus. But just things like allowing for them to have it in the classroom without any punishment or any like thing, like, to me, like, that's incorporating their culture into my classroom and allowing to say, okay, it's okay, as long as, obviously I set parameters, blah, blah, blah. When it was time to put them away, it was time to put them away, just as an example. But so either one, do it that way where you're, thinking about culture separately from whether it's race, ethnicity, like religious traditions or just holiday traditions, things like that, and do more broadly across culture, like cross-cultural stuff, or comma and slash or however we think about it. Pulling from those different, whether you have a handful of Black students, a handful of Asian students, a handful of Hispanic and white, or whoever you're in front of, and pulling from a little bit at a time. Like, if they mention something that they're interested in or kind of identify with, incorporate that into classroom as best as you can. Obviously, we are not superhuman. Obviously, we have limited time. Obviously, time is of the essence. But just again, being willing to say, okay, I know I have a lot of cultures in my classroom, so maybe this month I'm going to try to learn about these students and like what they like and pull from that for maybe next month and stuff like that. I think I don't think there's a definitive answer, really. I think because it really is just allowing yourself, again, I keep saying it, the willingness aspect of it to be flexible too. I know I keep saying willing to change, but also just flexible enough to, which is hard for us because we like to be in control. But just being flexible enough to try to do as best you can with the students that are in front of you. And again, that's going to look differently from person to person, but in classroom to class. And again, it's like still even compounded on top of that, all of this could be simply the same school, but you have a completely different set of kids in one class versus another. And what works for them won't work for another. So, or what they relate to doesn't relate to this other classroom. So like, there's so many aspects of this. Again, I keep like thinking about the diamond again. Like, there's so many different facets to it, and just, stopping, turning the diamond and looking at one and trying it. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, try another facet and try something else that, could possibly work. Yeah. So to answer your question, I don't think there's a definitive answer.
No, you're right. It does depend on you as the teacher. What students do you teach? And I also love how you just said that every class is going to have a different dynamic. And what works across the board, let's say for all third graders, if you have 5 third grade classes, it's not going to work. The same thing will not work across the board. I mean, maybe you're doing the same activities, the same songs, but you're going to have to maybe have a little bit of a different approach, where one class you're spending longer on something and another one, you got to keep it moving because the kids are going to, there's going to be some behavior stuff going on. And so let's just be honest. And so, it is, you're right. Knowing your students, knowing, like you said, the culture, like I'm thinking when you related culture back to fidget spinners and the things the kids have, like thinking back to when I was a kid, like how much has culture changed?
Yeah,
you know, and
totally.
so it is teaching kids where they're at right now, not holding on so much to, but I've always done things this way, or
Yeah.
I've always, this is how I was taught. Well, the way I was taught in college, I had to change it up. It was just like, this isn't working. And so
Yeah.
it is about, like you said, and you did the same thing, knowing your kids, knowing their culture, multiple different ways you presented cultures in this episode, and knowing that the kids you're teaching right now are not going to be like you were when you were a kid. They are living in a totally different day and age. There's so much technology going on, and I feel like sometimes that makes their attention spans be a little bit shorter. It just is. And it's not, I wouldn't say that's a bad or good thing. It is just about, well, if technology is what works, then bring it on in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the honest truth. So I've loved everything you've said. In fact, I myself am going to go back and listen to this whole episode because it was amazing. And thank you so much. Is there any advice you have for music teachers about anything that we discussed today, or any encouragement you have for them as they're listening today?
I feel like a broken record at this point. Again, it starts with, like, you might be in a situation where you are frustrated and you are stuck in a rut and nothing seems to be working, no matter what strategy you try, that you have tried, you've researched, you've tried things. So I guess a bit of advice I would give is to not give up on that, because, I mean, we're talking about students here, and our jobs really is to, give our students, all students, the best education that we possibly can. And so that's our job. Like, that's what you get paid for. Like, you're if you don't want to get paid for it anymore, then you need to leave. But if you I think that reflection aspect is super important. And I could have stayed in my rut and tried to persevere. And like I said before, I don't think I would still be a teacher. I think I would have gone crazy. I would have gone mad. I would have lost my freaking mind. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you kind of take a step back and look at yourself and reflect on, okay, this isn't working. What am I not doing? Because you might think I'm doing everything great, but the evidence of what's happening in your classroom is saying otherwise. That's a hard pill to swallow too.
It is.
It's like, I feel like I'm a great teacher, but these kids aren't doing the right thing, or you're not engaged in my, no, it's not the kids, in my opinion.
Right. Which, like you said, it is a hard pill to swallow, to say like something needs to change about what I'm doing. It's hard.
It's difficult. We have such a tight control over what happens in our classroom. We're the ones that set it up. We're the ones that plan. We're the ones that do all this. But when it doesn't work, like, who else are you turning to but yourself? And so I think that is maybe one of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give, is that reflection and taking the time. And it sounds like super cheesy to say that, but without that piece, again, I don't think I would be where I am today. And I think the flexibility, the willingness, like I said over and over again, but just being okay with, I think it's another thing. I think that's actually a Marshmello and Demi Lovato song now. It's okay. It's okay to not be okay, or something like that.
Yeah.
Look it up. Look it up. It's pretty good. It's okay to make mistakes. That kind of willingness to fail. And I mean, there were times, as another little side note, that I messed up, and I don't want to come off as I'm this expert, or I'm just like a normal teacher. I'm just trying to share all of this with other people, share my experience, share things that I've learned. But there were times where I didn't get it right. Like, for instance, one Black History Month, I started, and I kept going throughout my years of teaching, but I put a picture of Bruno Mars because I assumed incorrectly that Bruno Mars was Black because of the kind of music that he produces and sells and stuff like that. He's not Black, he's Polynesian. And I had a teacher call me out on that. And again, I worked in a predominantly Black school, so I was the minority. So I felt awful, completely awful. And I had to go back to that teacher and apologize and say, I really messed up. This was a complete assumption. And thank you so much for reminding me that I just can't assume anymore. Reverse side of that, I had a student more recently, right before maybe a year or two ago. I've added to all this Black History Month stuff. And so I put up this huge like hallway length of just black and white pictures of prominent Black musicians of all shapes and sizes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the kids was like, well, where's Ariana Grande? And I'm like, oh, I was like, Ariana Grande is not Black. It was a learning moment for them, the kids, but I was like, they made an assumption, and I would like, it was a whole, reverse moment. And I guess all that to say, I'm not perfect, plenty of mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of my biggest mistakes was not changing when I needed to change, or not taking the time to get to know my students because I had 60 other things to do, or not allow my students to speak in class. You get one kindergartner raises their hands and says something about a dog, and then 60 other of them raise their hands to say something about their dog.
That's so true.
It's like, everybody experiences at some point. I allowed those moments to happen. I think that was important, that they felt heard and that they felt valued enough to take the time out of my class. Did I probably get to the rest of that lesson? No. But when I came to that realization that to be dismissive of my students wanting to raise their hand, to me, that was a failure on my part. Did I do that all the time? Absolutely not. I would have never gotten it done. But being comfortable and being comfortable and being uncomfortable, I guess that can be a nice way to wrap everything up that I've been trying to say in regards to just advice, and just knowing that it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to get a fairy godmother teacher and she's going to sprinkle her magic wand and make things go bibbity bobbity boo, and everything's going to be picture perfect like you imagine it to be, and that's okay. And first you don't succeed, try again, and we kind of move on and persevere and things like that. So
yes, it's all about giving yourself grace and not giving up. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing about you making mistakes, because I never want anybody listening to this podcast to think, we're just like, I know everything. Like I never messed up in my whole life. No. That's not true. Not true at all. You're going to make mistakes too. You're going to mess up. You're going to say things or do things or teach a lesson the way that it shouldn't have been taught or whatever. And that's okay. Don't harp on it, and don't be so hard on yourself, but keep going and learn from it. I feel like the biggest learning opportunities is when you learn from things that have been struggles or things that did not go well. You're like, okay, like you said about reflecting, it's why did that not go well and what can I do moving forward? And that's where you don't stay stuck. So thank you so much for all of that. And so let everybody know where they can connect with you online, because I know there's going to be so many music teachers wanting to reach out after this episode.
There's a couple of ways. I have a Twitter account. It's at Mr. Hall Pass. My last name is Hall. I love puns. It just seemed like the perfect handle for Twitter. So you can message me on Twitter there. Other than that, my email is Casey, CASEY.Hall, HALL @DOE.K12.GA.US. So many dots. You can find that there. If you're listening to this and don't have anything to write it down, you can just go to the Georgia Department of Education and Fine Arts website. If you don't know what that is, totally fine. Just Google GADOE, Godot Fine Arts. It'll be the first webpage to pop up on Google, and then all of our contact information is there as well. I do have a webinar that you can request an access link that is talking about cultural pedagogies and kind of what's the bigger picture, kind of what we've been talking about today. If you would like the link to that, you can again go to our website and request that link through one of our like Microsoft Forms kind of things, and I'll send you that link as well. Or if you just want to like email me like, hey, I'd love to talk more about this, I would totally love to give you my phone number out, and we can have a separate conversation after this. I think it's important. I think it is relevant to talk about it as teachers. So yeah, I am here to support you as much as I can, or just have a virtual cup of coffee right now and just kind of talk on Zoom or wherever we need to meet up or serve. Yeah, so hit me up.
Awesome. And make sure you check the show notes, because all the links will be there as well. So thank you so much, Casey. I appreciate you coming on, and thank you so much for having this conversation today. It was so needed, and your sharing was so great, and I appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you asking me to be on here. So thanks.
Well, hey there. Thank you so much for listening into the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. There is an exclusive Facebook group just for listeners of this podcast and any elementary music teacher called the Elementary Music Teacher Community Facebook group. Come on over and join us there, where we have conversations around the podcast episodes and encourage each other each and every week. And also head to my website, thedomesticmusician.com. I have some free resources there that you can download to help you gain traction in your classroom today, as well as the blog and the membership site and all kinds of other goodies to help you keep going in your music teaching journey. I cannot wait to keep connecting with you and encouraging you and spurring you on in your journey of teaching elementary music. Hang in there, have an amazing week, and I will see you soon.